Thank you, Roman. So tell me this. How is your voice working for you? Oh, and everybody gets real serious and wonder, well, that's why I'm here, right? Does it help you? Or does it hurt you? Or maybe you're not so sure. How do you know whether it's doing the job for you? We're going to spend some time today and cover some topics, two major areas. One is how to get your voice to sound the best that it can sound, given that the instrument that you have. And then once we have you sounding like Oprah, then we'll move on to some delivery techniques with the voice that I think will be useful to all of you. So hang on to your hats, we're going to get started. The first thing we're going to look at is those things that make your voice sound better. And I'm going to cover 5 different factors. There's a little card on your seat there. There are 3 of them there, and one of them has 2, and the 4th one is buried in the next little sessions. But this will be sort of an agenda for the meeting today. But before we get started right into those 5 factors for how your voice sounds, we're going to partner up a bit. Right? And this, I guarantee you, is the hardest part of the entire seminar. It's figuring out if you're a 1 or a 2 and who your partner is. Okay, so why do we have a partner? Because the first thing we're going to do is have a little exercise. Now, I mentioned that for how your voice sounds, there are 5 different factors we're going to cover here. And the first one you're going to do as partners. And the first one is breathing. Gosh. We all know how to breathe, right? If we didn't, we wouldn't have been able to walk in here. But there are several different ways of breathing, and we're going to look at 2 of them and see how one works particularly better than the other for how your voice sounds. So how many of you run, exercise, do something like that? All right? And for those who didn't raise their hand, how many of you have ever done anything that raised your heart level? All right? And I won't go into what that was. All right? So if that happens, how do you typically breathe? Let's say you're a jogger or you're a weekend warrior and you're out running and you're kind of getting tired. You typically will breathe how? Kind of like this. Right? Now, that kind of breathing is absolutely the best kind of breathing for an athlete because it gets CO2 out of your lungs and it gets oxygen into your lungs in the most efficient way possible. And that's really what you're trying to do if you're an athlete. However, most of us, maybe not all, but most of us who are public speakers, that's not an aerobic exercise that gets us to that level, right? So unless you run around a lot, and actually a couple of the table topics last night I think may have gone that far, unless you run around and get really winded, you probably don't need to do what I call the athlete's breath, right? So there's a different kind of breathing. If you're a singer, you've heard this funny phrase called diaphragmatic breathing. And I'm not going to get into what your diaphragm is and how that all works, because every one of you can do this kind of a breath because I know that you've done it. How many of you have yawned before? Yeah, we all know how to do that, right? And so I already have people yawning, and that's good. At this point, that means I'm connecting. So that kind of a yawn breath is very different than the athlete's breath. So athlete's breath that we just did, you think about doing them repeatedly, right? But you can actually do one athlete's breath. And that's the kind of breath that an awful lot of us do by default when we get excited and we're doing our speech and we can hardly wait to get on to the next point. And so we take that kind of quick breath and we never really get a good breath, right? So we're going to call this other kind of breath, which is the beginning of a yawn, we're going to call that the speaker's breath, because that's the breath that will be your friend. So I want each of you, now we don't have to go the yawn all the way to stretching your mouth, kind of. You don't have to do that. But think about what a yawn feels like and looks like when you just begin it. It's kind of, right? So can you do that with me? Just that easy yawn breath? Yeah. See how relaxing and refreshing that is and how you get oxygen down into your lungs? That's really good. That's the breath that we're going to concentrate on using for the singers. Now, here's where the partner comes in. We're going to do the following. We're going to do each partner in turn is going to take an athlete's breath and count out loud to 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Right? And then that same person is going to take a speaker's breath and count to 10 again. Right? So we'll start with number ones, will be the breathers and speakers. The number twos have a role, and that's to listen to the two different versions and see if the voice sounds any different in the speaker's breath versus the athlete's breath. Okay? When the ones have done their speaking thing, then we swap roles, and the number twos get to breathe and speak, and the number ones listen to see if it's any different. All right, so we'll start out with ones. Everybody who's a one, raise their hand. All right? All right, good. So turn and face your two. All right. Twos, you have a particularly critical role here. You're listening for, does the voice sound any different? So number ones, we're going to do an athlete's breath, just one, kind of, and then count to 10. Here we go. Breathe. 1, 2. Okay, raise your hand when you're done. Okay, now, same number ones, take that speaker's breath, that kind of beginning of a yawn breath, and do the same count. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Okay, number twos, maybe you were listening and heard something different, maybe you didn't. All right? Okay, I'm losing control again. Number twos now are the breathers and speakers, and number ones are listening to their number two partner. So number ones, you're going to do that athlete's breath, that kind of shallow, and count to 10. Here we go. 1. All right, and once you've done that, then you can go and take that deeper speaker's breath and do the same thing. 1, 2. All right, raise your hand when you're done. All right, good. Goodness, this is a tough crowd. That is the exercise, except what I'd like to have is anyone who's bold enough to say, when you were listening, did you hear anything different between the athlete's breath version and the speaker's breath version? Anybody want to volunteer? Yes, sir.
The volume is much better, and
yeah.
the enunciation is more clear.
All right.
The deep breath.
So it's sort of a bigger voice. Yeah. Anyone else?
More resonant.
Had more resonance? You get a gold star. We're going to talk about resonance in a very short minute.
It sounded warmer and kind of friendlier.
Warmer and friendlier? Yeah, yes.
More relaxed.
More relaxed? Very good, very good. These are all really good things. Yes, sir, in the back.
How is it going to change the mode of how the person's going to start talking? When you breathe in quick, it almost gives like an anxiety to the breath compared to a slow, deep breath with more relaxing for the audience.
Yeah, so to some degree, the voice with the athlete's breath almost sounds nervous. And maybe it is nervous, right? Because you're not grounded with that other breath. So that's first factor in terms of getting your voice to sound the best that it can sound is simply take the speaker's breath instead of the athlete's breath. And now we all know how to do that, and we'll all make that the default breath that we always use when we give our speeches, right? Every speech is going to start instead of, right? And that tone is just going to be delightful. Okay, that's factor number one. Factor number two is relaxation, right? Which kind of gets to the point of the gentleman in the back as well. So this time we're going to do the same thing, except we're not going to do it with partners. You're all going to do it together with me. We're going to take that nice speaker's breath that we all know how to do now, and then we're going to tense something. And I don't really care what you tense as long as it's on your own body. All right? And so you'll take that good speaker's breath, you'll tense something, it might be your forearm, it might be your ankle, I don't really care. And then we're going to count together 1 to 5, and I'll actually direct it. 1, 2, 3, all right? So are you ready for that? So we're all ready to take that good speaker's breath, then we'll tense something, then we'll count. So here's the breath, tense something, here's 1, 2, 3, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's do that again just so we get the feel of it. So take a good breath. Tense something.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Okay, all right. Now, let's see if we can not tense the thing you just tensed. And what's the easiest way? He's yawning. I've really connected there. That's actually one of the best ways to make sure that you didn't tense, right? But let's say it was my forearm that I tensed to make my body tense. The easiest way to get rid of tension is to move the thing that got tense, right? So my particular tension spots happen to be in my calves and on the back of my head here. So the easiest way for me not to be tense is just maybe to shift weight or move a little bit here, and that loosens up the tension in my calves. If back here is tense, I may look this way, I may look that way because it loosens it up. But whatever it was that was just tense for you, this time we're going to take the breath and we're just going to move it a little bit, and then we're going to count to 5 again. All right, you with me? Here we go. Here's the good breath. Move that tense spot and count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, now we're going to do them back to back. So we'll take the breath, tense something, count, and then take another breath and loosen it by a little motion in 1 to 5. Okay, with me? Here we go. Here's the breath. Tense. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, now we'll take another breath and we'll move that tense thing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right, so from what you hear in the room, do you hear a difference in the tone that everybody in the room is producing? Yeah, I see a lot of nods, right? There's just something about tension that locks up your voice. And if your voice is locked up, the audience is going to perceive that too. If your voice is nice and loose by taking the good breath, staying loose with your body, the voice is just going to command a better presence than it would otherwise. So that's factor number, what was that? 2, right? So we did breathing, and we've done relaxation. Factor number 3 is posture. And it's funny, everybody sits up. At this point, oh yeah. Your mama told you, you better stand up straight, or you better sit up straight, right? Now she did that because you would look better if you did that. And that's certainly true too. But the curious thing is that it also affects your voice. So we're going to do this. I want each of you to lean your chair backwards as far as you can without it tipping over onto the person behind you. All right? And maybe you can just lean in the chair without it getting off the legs. That's fine too. But I want to kind of be really back and really awful posture, right? All right? So everybody's in that position. Now, take the speaker's breath. Okay. How did that work? It didn't work very well, did it? All right. Sit up straight and try that speaker's breath. Was it easier? Yeah. So posture actually has a big influence on your voice because of how it impacts your breathing, and also, by the way, because then your breathing impacts your relaxation. Right? So posture is a good thing. If you're standing, stand up straight. We don't have to be military stiff, right? Stand up straight because this is going to cut off your breathing. Right? So we've talked breathing, we talked relaxation, we've talked posture. Next thing is, and we'll get to your point, is resonance in general, right? Most of what we've been doing so far is to enhance the resonance of your voice. Now, what is resonance? Well, any of you ever play a brass instrument? Yeah, a whole bunch of them. What did you play? Trumpet and euphonium, all right? So I was a cornet player. It's kind of like a trumpet, right? Did you ever take the mouthpiece and just play the mouthpiece? Oh, yeah. What did it sound like? It's hard to do. It sounds like, right? It's not very pretty, right? Now, you put that into the trumpet, though, or the euphonium if it was that one, and all of a sudden it sounds like a trumpet or a euphonium. It sounds really good, right? Why is that? It's because of all that perfectly molded tubing, brass tubing, and the big bell at the end enhances the sound of your vibrating lips into the sound that sounds like the brass instrument. Well, our voice does that too, right? We have these little vocal cords, little tiny membranes down here in our throat, and they sound just like if you put a microphone right above them. But to sound like your voice, the resonance chamber is your throat and your mouth. Right? So the best sound that you will get is to expand the throat and the mouth to the degree you can without being tense. What's the best way to do that? Take the speaker's breath. Right? So take that breath and see if you can feel what happens to your throat and to your mouth. Here we go. Right? What happened? It kind of opens up. right? It opens up. It relaxes you as well. I'm getting yawns. That's really good. It opens up and it makes a nice resonating cavity for your voice that makes your voice sound like your voice. So if your voice kind of occasionally gets kind of thin, chances are pretty good that you're choking off in the throat or that your mouth is tight, right? That breath will open it up and it will just make your voice a lot more resonant. Now, there's a couple other things that do impact resonance. One in particular that I want to do, and you're going to do it with me. I want you to take a good speaker's breath, good posture, sitting up. We'll take good speaker's breath and we'll count to 5, the same way we've done already, but we're going to do it with our cheekbones down with a frowny face. Okay, everybody ready? So, good posture, good breath, and frown and count to 5. Here we go.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Good. Now I want to do exactly the same thing, but we're going to lift these muscles above your cheeks and make a smiley face. Here we go. Here's the breath.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Which did you like better? Yeah, bingo, right? A smile really helps the resonance of your voice. Now, do you think this matters if you're talking on the phone?
Yes.
They can't see you, but they can hear you, right? So they can tell if you're smiling on the other end of the line. So it almost doesn't matter if you're speaking to an audience or you're just talking on the phone or you're in a meeting. A smile goes a long ways to enhance the resonance and the liveliness and the engaged factor of the sound of your voice. All right, so we've talked about breathing, we've talked about relaxation, we've talked about posture, we've talked about resonance. The last thing, I have to look at my notes, I've forgotten, is pitch. Oh, and the reason I forgot is that pitch actually is both something that affects your voice, how it sounds, and also how you do delivery. Right? So, has anyone ever suggested to you, or maybe you picked up in conversations, that a low voice is something that's really to be cultivated, that a low voice is better than a not low voice? I see a lot of people nodding their heads, right? There must have been like hundreds of research papers written on why that's the case, right? Not one. And I've been looking for years to find one paper that did a psychological study that said that somebody with a low voice was a better speaker than somebody with a high voice. If any of you were in Mark Skipper's presentation, he mentioned Zig Ziglar. Anybody know Zig Ziglar? Have you ever listened to him? He's got the highest voice I ever heard. Right? Did that keep him from making millions of dollars as a public speaker? No, it never did. Now, I actually went through on YouTube videos looking at presidential elections, seeing which candidate won the election. Was it the high voice guy or the low voice guy? Kind of depends on the decade, but it's a wash. Right? The high voice wins sometimes, the low voice wins sometimes. What is important is that you use the voice that's best for you. Now, his voice is different than her voice is different than her voice, right? Because your biology is different. The size of your vocal cords are different, and the space that you have to make it. So to suggest that a low voice is really important really is off the wall. And you'll find if you Google voice coaches, there are coaches out there who will say, we'll help you make a lower voice. So if I were to give this whole speech in this pitch range instead of the pitch range that I've been using so far, in about 10 minutes I'm going to get tired. Right? Because there's tension here to produce that lower voice, because that's not where my voice is. All right. So how do you figure out what your optimal voice range is? The good news is there's a simple exercise to do that. The bad news is I don't have time to do it. But I will give you a hint. Actually, 2 hints. One is if you go to my website, it's on the little card there. There's an article called How Low Should You Go that defines all of what we've talked about here and the exercise. But I'll give you a hint for the exercise. If you're an active listener and you are listening to someone else and you really want them to keep talking, but you don't want to remain completely silent, one of the standard, at least American customs is to go, mm-hmm. Right? Anybody ever done mm-hmm? Of course you do, right? Well, what I just did, mm-hmm, bounded the optimum pitch range for my voice. The of right about there is about the lowest that I should probably talk as in my default range, and the right about there is about as high as I should probably talk. Now that doesn't mean I can never talk down there, because I will, but it means that most of the time that I talk, I'm going to talk in that range. Okay, that was fun.